Hey investor friends, I'm Michelle Markey and let me ask you a question. Do you like keeping tabs on some of your favorite super investors? Well, I do, and some of my favorites and greatest of all time investors are Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, and I also like checking in on their investing disciples known as Mohnish Pabrai and Spier, and I'll also touch on a little bit of what I'm observing from portfolios of Greg Alexander, who I know Warren Buffett admires tremendously, as well as Li Lu, who I know Charlie Munger admires tremendously. And I'll also share a little bit of some highlights of what I learned this year, like how Charlie Munger stole the show in investing Daily Journal Corporation's cash into the first investment in almost 7 years. And then also how I learned that Warren Buffett is more of a large cap growth investor rather than a value investor. And a lot of people just think he's a value kind of guy. And even Berkshire Hathaway is considered to be a value stock. But in reality, it's ironic how it seems like Warren Buffett is more of a large cap growth investor instead. And he's been doing a whole lot of sitting in cash this year. So interestingly, 2021 hasn't been all too exciting in terms of buying for some of these investors, but they've been making some moves. Like there's been a little bit of some controversial moves by Mohnish Pabrai lately, and a lot of people are trying to figure out what his next investing moves are. And Spier has largely not made too many moves this year. So if you also enjoy learning about what some of these investors are up to, I'd love if you could please like and subscribe to my video and YouTube channel, because I'm going to go into what they've bought and sold recently. And one awesome reason to keep tabs on these particular super investors' activities is because they have proven track records of being compounding machines, and they're also concentrated long-term investors, which means that they tend to invest for the long term, holding their positions for many years, and they also only invest in very few stock picks. So if you look at a lot of their portfolios, most of the invested capital are usually in their top 10 or 15 picks. And that's kind of it. They don't really get too much into diversification, and it's not the kind of diversification that a lot of mainstream tends to be invested in, where people could easily be invested in index funds, which will be invested in hundreds or thousands of stocks that people haven't really studied all that much, because how can you study that many companies? So by taking a more concentrated portfolio approach, these investors go the extra mile in studying companies, and then they invest their money into the companies that they believe will perform well over the long term. So by learning what they're invested in, that can also give us some clues or ideas about what might be potentially good investments, such as if anyone had invested in Berkshire Hathaway some decades ago, they could have been multi-millionaires, because Berkshire Hathaway had compounded annual rates of return of 20% over many decades. So that would have been a clear winner. So if anyone had copied Warren Buffett in just investing in his company, Berkshire Hathaway, since the 80s or 90s, they would have made bank by now. And even though that happened and that's awesome, that's in the past. So we just got to look forward and see if we can replicate some of that success in figuring out future investments. And maybe Berkshire Hathaway will continue to deliver excellent returns. So maybe it's not too late to invest in something like Berkshire Hathaway at the end of 2021. And that's not advice, but it's something that we should just keep looking into and studying to figure out at what price would Berkshire Hathaway be a good investment. And like Mohnish Pabrai says, there's no shame in being a shameless cloner. And it's not like you're blindly copying what some of these investors are invested in, but you're looking at some of the companies that they're invested in and trying to figure out if it can be within your circle of competence, or if it's too hard to understand, and then you move on. So I think it's awesome that their 13F filings and shareholder reports come out every now and then, so that we can know what they've been up to and then decide for ourselves what companies we think we're competent in our ability to invest in, and that we'd also like to hold on to for the long term. And I'll be mostly reflecting on what these super investors held in their portfolios as of Q3 2021, which we learned about when their 13F filings got released between October and November 2021, because we won't really know what they've invested in Q4 2021 aside from some news reports or some rumors, because usually 13F filings come out up to 45 days after the end of the quarter. So we will know what they might have invested in Q4 2021 by the time it's either something like early January for Daily Journal Corporation, or more likely the middle of February February for most of these super investors. And so starting with Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway portfolio, I try to pay attention to any of the moves he's made among his top 10 or 15 holdings, because that's where I think Warren Buffett might be making the most investing moves, whereas he leaves the rest of the holdings to Ted and Todd to kind of decide and maybe own some practice shares to see if they eventually want to have more skin in the game. But the only thing that really stood out to me is throughout 2021, Buffett seems to have been buying more Verizon and also reducing the amount of Chevron than adding back some Chevron. And maybe if after selling 25 million shares in Q1 and Q2, he bought back 5.5 million shares of Chevron, maybe he's willing to buy $100 of Chevron and get $5 in dividends. And so maybe he's okay with living with that if oil goes up. Like if crude oil has been trading recently in the $60 to $70 range per barrel, and maybe it will go double in 2022 to something like $125 per barrel, then maybe Buffett stands to earn a decent return on his investment in addition to getting some of that dividend cash from something like Chevron. So we'll see if Chevron works out. But some of the other positions, even though they're probably managed by Ted and Todd, I also like to see what he's doing with Visa and MasterCard, because those companies are on my company wish list and they seem to reduce some of their holdings in Visa and MasterCard. But I'll see if they end up becoming more bullish on those two credit card companies, because I'm continuously trying to study payment systems and see what might be a good entry point into this world. And that's mostly it from what I observed from Berkshire Hathaway. I think Buffett is mostly just adding on to his something like $150 billion of cash he's just continuing to sit on. And he's probably waiting for an economic storm so that when it's raining gold, he's not just going to go out with a thimble, but actually go out with a bucket to collect a lot of stocks when they're on sale. And that's what I think Berkshire Hathaway is basically up to these days. And then chairman of Daily Journal Corporation and 97 years young Charlie Munger made big news headlines when he had Daily Journal by Alibaba in Q1 2021 and then effectively doubled down in Q3 2021, showing lots of bullish confidence in the future of Alibaba, where Alibaba has been tumbling in its share price ever since an infamous Jack Ma speech in October 2020, when Alibaba had reached a high market cap of $838 billion and now has taken a 62% haircut to being at $321 billion in early December 2021. And that's kind of like as if someone like Jason Momoa were to take a haircut and go from having luscious locks of hair to being bald, and that would be a horrific sight. And that's kind of what it seems like with Alibaba right now. But in spite of a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt surrounding Alibaba and lots of other Chinese stocks right now, it seems like Charlie Munger is holding a lot of conviction in his pick, and he's continuing to own it. And I remember reading an article where Charlie Munger is quoted in saying, unless common stock's future prospects are good, it's not good to own common stock as a cash equivalent. And he's basically substituted US Treasury bills, which have super low, if not negative interest rates, and instead added Alibaba to Daily Journal Corporation's equity portfolio. So he seems to be clearly believing that Alibaba will work out as an investment in the long term. Similarly, Mohnish Pabrai also made some headlines when he appeared to follow in the footsteps of Charlie Munger in also buying Alibaba in Q1 2021 and then adding to his position in Q2, and then surprising a lot of people when he sold 70% of his position in Alibaba. And because I've heard Mohnish say in one of his interviews that he manages around $750 million of assets under management, it kind of signals to me that he used to have maybe as much as 8% of his portfolio invested in Alibaba, and now it's down to about 1%, as I talk about in some of my recent videos that you can also check out. And I've tried to make it a point to study Alibaba throughout this year because people like Charlie and Mohnish have invested in Alibaba, and it makes a pretty good textbook example of how when incredible events are gripping a company and causing its market cap to decline by over 50%, this is what kind of great investing might be all about, is trying to sense an opportunity when the stock market is beating up on a company that might have future good prospects, and maybe it's a good time to potentially look at studying this kind of company to see if it's a good investment or not. And even though Mohnish sold a good chunk of Alibaba, he's got some historical tendencies of selling some of his other favorite holdings like Micron Technologies, which he reduces from time to time and then adds to from time to time. So maybe Mohnish is buying back some really cheap Alibaba in Q4, but only time will tell when his next 13F filing comes out. And maybe if it's no longer in the New York Stock Exchange BABA holding, maybe he's invested instead in the Hong Kong listed version of Alibaba, and then that might not appear on his 13F filing. So who knows if Mohnish is adding back Alibaba or moving on to other spawner businesses like Tencent. And I think it's awesome that Guy Spier might be the ultimate cloner, where it looks like he followed Mohnish and Charlie into buying some BABA in Q2, as well as also buying some DJ Co. And then I know he's also copied some of maybe Mohnish's investments in Micron and also the Indian Energy Exchange, as we can see on ticker, where we see a little bit more holdings than what we could see in Dataroma. And so it's also interesting to see if maybe Indian Energy Exchange is a good company to potentially invest in, and how might foreign investors invest in that type of company? Is it accessible via some of the common exchanges, or do we have to figure out some other route to potentially invest if we also want to copy that kind of investment and see if it's within our circle of competence? And I think it's fascinating that Guy Spier has holdings that he begins to go into by opening a position that's usually under 5%. And then there's also some reports lately that he's bought into Tencent via an investment in Prosus, which also is owned by Naspers. So it's interesting how looking at these South African and also Dutch companies are something that Mohnish and Guy might be interested in learning about because of Prosus's considerable stake in Tencent, which we know Mohnish loves as well. And it's interesting to try to follow this cookie crumb trail and see if we can understand the rationale behind why these super investors are buying potentially into the likes of Tencent, and to continue to verify if it's a real investment that some of these super investors are making. So if it's true that Guy Spier indirectly invested in Tencent via a stake in Prosus, according to a MarketWatch article I cited and a paywall CNBC video that I haven't watched, but that I've heard others say, he said that he apparently bought some Prosus. And so if that's true, Prosus has a 31% stake ownership in Tencent, and when they listed in September 2019, their 31% stake in Tencent was apparently worth around $130 billion, and back then Tencent was at a market cap of around $396 billion, and now Tencent is trading at $548 billion of a market cap, and that's a 40% haircut from its all-time high market cap of $916 billion. So I'm going to try to figure out what's the rationale behind Guy Spier investing in Tencent, and we'll see if maybe he and Mohnish may have really invested in Prosus, or maybe even Naspers, or maybe even directly Tencent or in the Hong Kong version, which we might not really find out, but it's still something of a cookie crumble trail to try to figure out if they're invested in this company and why. But I'm also trying to figure out if Guy Spier may have invested in Prosus by buying PRX as a ticker symbol, or maybe it was PROSY or PROSF, or what if he invested in Prosus through the parent company Naspers, and that would be NPN, or maybe NPSNY, and who knows? I really don't know. If you have more information and you have a validated source, please let me know in the comments, because I'm still trying to figure out which ticker symbols Guy Spier may have invested in. Warren Buffett has said if he ever retired, there are 3 people he would let manage his money, and they include Seth Klarman, Greg Alexander, and Li Lu. And what I think is fascinating with Greg Alexander's Conifer Management portfolio is that among the $1.5 billion of assets under management, his second top position is BABA, where he has about $266 million worth invested, and that's even more bullish than Charlie Munger. So that just stands out to me in that that he first started adding Baba to the portfolio in Q1, then reduced a little bit in Q2, and then added more in Q3. So to me, that's an incredibly bullish sign. And knowing that Warren Buffett totally endorses someone like Greg Alexander, I only wish there was more information out about the Superinvestor, but I've gathered what information I could find out about him, and I'm just trusting a little bit that he knows what he's doing and surprisingly is invested so much in Baba. Finally, what's also fascinating to me is how the Chinese Warren Buffett, known as Li Lu, bought Berkshire Hathaway to the tune of $245 million worth, or 900,000 shares, in Q3 2021. And he used to own Baba in the early part of 2020, but then sold out by Q2. So I'm also curious to know if maybe Li Lu and Himalaya Capital might buy back into Baba in the future, or if he's going to more aggressively build on a Berkshire Hathaway position. So I think that's very interesting and worthwhile to continue studying what could be changing and going on with Berkshire that makes it such a compelling investment right now for Li Lu. So that's all I got for the portfolio reviews I had for these super investors at the end of 2021. And if you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think about these super investors, or who are some of your favorite super investors. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time.